right. We're still on our CTO Advisor Road Trip. We're heading into GTC next week, Arun.
Okay.
And Arun, we had you on 8 weeks ago, and this just goes to show how fast AI is moving.
That's right.
We talked about the whole no apps concept, and I'm going to challenge you on that. My good friend Patrick Moorhead, who is a proper CEO level analyst, is building apps with Claude Code. We have OpenClaw, etc. So I'm going to push back and tell you we have way more apps than we've had before.
So Keith, first of all, thank you so much for having me again. It's wonderful to be here. Actually, you're proving my point. You're talking about Pat Moorhead, but let me tell you a story about the program managers at Articulate. Okay. In the last, I would say 8 weeks or so, or slightly longer than that, we've had our program managers push about the same amount of production code into production applications than our engineers have. Okay. And the reason for that is these are program managers who understand what is the outcome they need, and they're building apps for themselves, not for anybody else. And when I said there are no apps, what I meant by that is there are no traditional apps where you have a product manager defining what the app should be, an engineering team taking multiple sprints to build one, and you have all these teams to actually manage this app and maintain it.
So, all right, you're breaking my enterprise IT head. When you say they're pushing code or applications to production, define that for me. Because when I think about production applications, I think about the stuff that your team builds for customers.
That's right. So there's two ways to think about it. Right? So first of all, you have apps, but I'll put a star on them. Okay, this is what apps people are building for themselves, as well as scaling those apps, going in, and once they build it for themselves, they can get other people to use it as well. But those can only be built inside an enterprise for usage if you have what I would call a platform that supports building it safely and easily. So it's a software development kit from the platform you're using, and all the heavy work that goes into making sure that these kinds of things can scale, they're secure, they're safe inside an enterprise is under the surface. What they're building with the new tools, even the tools that came out in the last 8 weeks or so, can use this to be safe. However, they don't really need to know anything other than somebody telling them, look, this is the box that you're given, follow it.
All right, so I hear you, and I still need to connect some dots because they're pushing production code that solves an internal business case.
Yeah.
Like, you know what, I need to, there's a bunch of CRM data, and my team needs to be enabled with this CRM data to do better customer engagements. They can now build that. We talked about this reduced friction, but I think about like, okay, now I've created code. There needs to be code reviews. There needs to be like, there's all of this complexity that's now created.
Yes.
And typically that's complexity that I born as a IT enterprise expert.
Yeah. So that is part of the SDK along with the build tools. Exactly what you mentioned, which is code reviews, pull requests, making sure that the security responses are done. You're doing not just like say a surface level security scan, you're actually doing defense of depth kind of attacks and then figuring out, is this all still safe? Because any AI tool that you give people today, if you give a set of rules, but then you also say, no matter what, get this task done, it will get it done by circumventing the rules. So you need to have these two combined together to get you to the apps. What I'm telling you is even though these tools are maybe 8 weeks old, maybe 9 weeks old in the world, they're at a stage where you can still have only one human check here and push to production.
So I'm getting this.
Yes.
I get the concept,
Yep.
but in reality, what happens when I create more code, there's more cost. Let's talk about the economics of what it
Perfect.
means to support this.
Perfect. So it's not just more code, but also in terms of what is the churn that you're going to experience, right? So because when you go from a world where maybe your team is able to support 10 production apps to 1,000 production apps, how do you actually do that? And the apps also no longer require to be, say, alive for 2 years or 3 years or 10 years. They may show up for a couple of months and disappear. But in the couple of months, they need to still be safe.
Yeah, and they need to be secure. They need to be stable. There's bug fixes. There's always patching. Like what version of JVM blah 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 does this.
Yes. So all of that is what I would call the actual iceberg. And then you're only talking about the tip of the iceberg, right? So if you're talking about the platform and below the platform, in any of these kinds of tools, of course, you need to make sure that you have the right model access. But even if you're using the models in production, say in the cloud, any of these models you use, they have a variety of cost, like say models in there, right? So you can do auto and be okay more or less because it doesn't go to the highest thinking mode ever. But if you turn on high thinking, for example, in one day you can blow your budget.
And that's the thing that I feel like so this is the thing that we've always feared in enterprise IT is that, if we give the developer too much choice,
Yeah.
then the developer is always going to choose high thinking unless there's like practical implications for like, okay, this is choosing high thinking creates too much latency, but why would I not choose it otherwise?
Yeah, so most people like they wouldn't realize the difference between auto and high thinking and would think that, well, if I use high think, I'll always get high quality.
Right.
Not necessarily the case. It depends on what problem you're trying to solve. But that's just, again, a very small portion of it.
And we call this commonly between Articulate and the CTO advisor, we call this the reasoning layer. Like
That's right.
someone or something needs to make this decision. The human needs to decide what business outcome and what process they want. And then the system needs to make these levels of decisions.
Yes. And
That doesn't, Arun, sorry, that doesn't exist.
not in production. That's exactly what we're building and actually delivering to our customers. But if you're looking at cost, right? So this is just if you're going after a model that's outside. What if you're an enterprise that's deploying internally?
Right.
So you need to worry about GPU costs, of course. But then most people stop here. But below that, there is an entire cost module that is not really that well understood, which is you have to think about, okay, you do all of this, you need to have a deployment layer. How are you going to deploy all this and make sure that you can do this? Now, I can tell you, even in 1 week, 5 models land that are at frontier level or above frontier level, there is no argument that you have to actually update.
Right.
It's not like you can choose not to update.
This is no longer, do I go to the next version of SAP to get features I don't need?
Yes.
Users, we talked about this preamble, which is, what users are abandoning their internal co-pilot systems and using what they have available openly commercially.
Absolutely.
I'll whip out the credit card and it's nothing to spend $200 a month on the latest Claude or OpenAI. Really doesn't matter.
You want a GLM5, you want DeepSeek, any of
Like I've seen people spend their own personal money to get these things.
Yes, because the delta that they get in terms of performance and quality is something they can't beat, right? So that's why you have to be prepared for this. So there's a deployment infrastructure that you need to be able to do. How do you version it? How do you make sure that 3 days ago I gave an answer, now I changed the model, the answer is slightly different. How do you make sure that the users understand that? That's number one. Second thing is you need an observability stack. Who's using what? By how much? Which outcomes are coming out of what? All of that needs to come from an observability stack, right? And which, by the way, today most of enterprise teams would build themselves internally.
Right.
They will have to figure out how to partner efficiently because this level of change nobody's used to.
And not only that, this level of data we're not used to.
Not used to. Not at all. And then there is a security stack. And you're talking about all of this, okay, then how do you then go do all of your updates? Not just at the model level, but then once you change a model, people go and change a whole bunch of prompts. And then if you have your own personal prompts and you have your enterprise level prompts, how do you manage all this? Right? And if you notice, this is soon becoming a massive, massive iceberg. And most of the time, the conversation stops here. Maybe it goes down up to here.
And this is the problem that I've been talking about for the past few months, which is how do I scale the 10x developer? And the 10x developer is not even a engineer anymore. It is a program manager, a product manager. It is the person that has kind of figured out the hack, but I don't know how to make that scalable across my entire organization.
Exactly. And that's, I mean, I've not even written a couple of other things, right? So, for example, the other thing you need to worry about is what is the SLA you need? Do you need the answer back in 5 minutes? Is it okay to wait for 2 hours? Or do you need the answer back in 30 seconds?
This goes back to kind of my AI factory research that I've been doing. Like GPU access is still relatively scarce.
Yes.
A lot of these problems are solvable on AMD EPYC and Intel Xeon and ARM. And CPU is perfectly fine to solve some of these problems, but there has to be a reasoning layer that makes that determination for me.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then if you add on HA, so high availability, because when we go talk to enterprises, they would say, well, I need my answers to come back between 30 to 60 seconds. However, I need to support 100 concurrent users, and the downtime cannot be longer than 2 hours in a year.
So, Arun, we've talked about the problem.
Yeah.
You've modeled out your iceberg kind of framework for what enterprises need to be thinking about. Now, let's talk about the solution.
Yeah.
What are you folks doing internally and for your customers to solve this iceberg problem?
So absolutely, we are customer zero for our products because of necessity, which is we have to enable as many people in the company to go as fast as possible and be able to build things and test things to their corner cases before it ever hits a customer. The only way we can do that is use our platform and SDKs in ways that we ourselves haven't completely used up to now, which is everybody is enabled to go use our platform, our SDKs to go build whatever they need to build. That's number one. And if you really think about it, the costs go up a little bit, but then that's in terms of the returns that you're getting, it's nothing compared to the actual outcome that we are enabling. That's number one. The second thing is it's important to give people a sense of control, meaning it's not okay to just tell people, hey, you spent, say, $1,000 for nothing, versus telling them, look, this is how much is your budget. And this is what drives the cost into your budget. Because the question we got first time was, oh, but what does this output mean? Like it thinks by itself and then it gives me a final output. We're like, yeah, but then you don't need to turn on thinking mode. Why don't you turn that off and then just put it in auto and you'll be fine. It's the subtle things like that you need to get into the mix. And most importantly, don't approach this as an add-on to your existing processes, which is you have an existing workflow. Obviously, it was working. That's why your enterprise is working. However, you need to think about what can you do with these tools that were impossible to do without these tools.
Yeah, we're just talking to a town in Colorado that has 80 years of transaction of real estate transaction data on microfiche. There's a human process for looking that up and referencing that, and instead of repeating the human process for doing that, they created an AI specific process for doing it, and they're having success.
Yes, and also think about how you can push boundaries for yourself. That's really what is beginning to give the biggest unlock for us. And we're also starting to see that with multiple customers who you may think traditionally are very slow movers. Think of large scale manufacturers. Think of major banks or securities agencies. Those are entities where the change management itself might take years. And they're actually moving much faster.
So as I think about this as a systematic change in how I operate, the great thing about AI, kind of the ratchet here, is that I don't even have to learn the SDK.
No.
I can point my IDE, my code assistant, to the SDK and the SDK documentation.
In fact, we go one step further. The build tools also come with cursor rules.
Wait, you just introduced something that I think forces me to there's whole no code platforms.
That's right.
Designed for non-coders.
Yes.
Cursor's IDE.
It's as good as a non-code for no-code users.
So you're actually having these program managers are actually just using Cursor?
Yes. They're using Cursor. That's what I mean. We didn't even build a tool that is completely no code. It is the same tool that developers use. We don't have time to go build new internal tools. And we said, well, if you want to use it, try it if you want to. Whoa. Now, their usage of Cursor is very different than a developer would, meaning they would never look at the code.
Right.
They don't have the big code editor.
Yeah, they don't care. The code editor window can actually be closed.
But they
That's all
have
about
the
the agents.
chat window, and then they're like looking at the chat and what is going on. But that is more than good enough for them to get to their outcome.
So as a IT security expert, as someone who's looking for guardrails, it becomes the rules themselves become the guardrails.
That's right. That's right. And put a star there because, yes, we have an A8 coder internally that we actually ship as our product. But that coder can be Cursor rules. It can be Cloud code. It can be Kimi code, any of those things you want. We have A8 code just because we can build our build tools and SDKs together. So it's all packaged together. But from an enterprise standpoint, what tools you particularly use to build anymore, as long as it hits the latest models and as long as you have the right set of configurations to go with it and you enable autonomy, that is important because that's another thing that changed in the last 8 weeks. Completely autonomous. Instead of just asking and getting an answer back, I say do this and it near autonomously builds something that I can then come back and look at.
And I think that's the big difference in the past 8 weeks from when we had the conversation. When we had the conversation, I was thinking more of your DSM in the terms of traditional professional services engagement. There's, kind of your experts, there's your application developers or engineers, and then there's the customers. And the engineers kind of this shim between the experts and the customer. Now we've kind of reduced that friction, and the experts and the customer are now sitting together and just working through Cursor.
In fact, we did one more thing here where we took our domain-specific model development workflow, which generates a massive knowledge graph as an input to building models, and turned that into what we call data perception, which any enterprise can subscribe to do on their own, which is you just point to wherever your data is sitting, whether it is sitting in SharePoint, Snowflake, Databricks, in your own like local object store, doesn't matter. This will go in and agentically process all of the data sets wherever they are sitting, as long as there is compute access to closest to the data, get you to a full-blown knowledge graph of your entire data set. And if you do it yourself, you just subscribe to the data perception app, if you may, and you get that. Or you can also get that as a service from us. The next thing that it translates to is once you have that, you can decide, do you need a domain-specific model to take advantage of all the core knowledge you have? It'll also be part of the report that comes out of it. And then you can do model training with support from the platform, meaning it'll tell you whether you have sufficient data only to fine-tune, or do you have sufficient data to continuously pre-train? Or it'll also say, look, you know what, you have enough data. If you really wanted to, you can actually full-blown pre-train from scratch if you choose to in your own domain. And these are the kinds of tasks you can actually do with it.
So I have to ask the question, because this is abstracting a lot of the kind of dirty work that we have to do and that I'm hiring my experts to do. Where's the expertise moving to in the enterprise to do this stuff?
So the expertise really needs to be here to down and also to make sure that you adapt to the changes that is coming at you. Because nobody can say, even the frontier model research labs can't say their models are the only things they can rely on. They have to be able to hit the other models to make sure how they compare. And it's not just the models are getting bigger because they're just getting bigger and more data set. The architectures are fundamentally shifting. There's new things that are coming into the models that even with the research team, you need to have the ability to adapt.
So how does the platform, your platform specifically, help me solve or keep up with this problem?
Perfect. So first of all, your data is continuous. We call it perception because it's a continual process, so it keeps going on. But even the underlying models are fully supported by us, meaning every time there is a model update that comes in, anytime we update the model, which is, by the way, multiple times a week, all of our subscribers get all of those capabilities right away.
So I'm focused again as an expert within the enterprise that's adopted your platform. I'm focused on my organization's goals, guardrails, security parameters, etc. And I'm not trying to keep up with what the latest version of open AI's
Or the latest version of DeepSeek, or what is the latest OCR model, none of that.
or even choosing between, like, even if I'm looking at the models from Meta, I'm not trying to determine which one of those models are the ones that I should be keeping
No, no,
up
no.
with.
I mean, in fact, like Meta has gone so slow now that, like, say, Llama 4 Maverick is getting deprecated in most of the model providers, right? Because of all of the other models significantly leapfrogging.
All right. Anything that I've missed, or we
Uh,
talked about a lot.
lot of stuff. So the other thing is, like, with domain specific models, right? So it's not that we used to be like, say, oh, we are like 20% better, 30% better. With a lot of the architecture changes and us using our platform to build our own models and change architectures. And I'll make a little bit of news here, which is we just finished a model that is our DSM for semiconductors, which at the top 1K of Verilog code generation and code acceptance test rates is at 2 times the performance of Claude Opus 4.6.
Wow.
Okay, now this is a 30 billion parameter model competing against, God knows, maybe a couple of trillion parameter models. But in the domain of semiconductor design, in the domain of Verilog generation and validation, it's 2 times better than your frontier model.
Well, this opens up a whole nother conversation around AI economics, etc. What happens when a model is 2x the performance and a fraction of the size?
And the cost and what
Yeah,
I can actually.
I can run that on a we're pre Nvidia. I can run that on a 6000 Pro.
Totally, totally.
All right, Arun, this has been a fascinating conversation. I know you'll be with customers having deeper conversations. I'm looking forward to revising this conversation 8 weeks from now. Maybe this whole thing will be obsolete. Who knows? We'll link the conversation that we just had, mainly around reasoning 8 weeks ago. It's super relevant because it tackles this part of the conversation about where our research is pointing to and what you need to understand, and how Articulate is addressing the larger problem around not just the infrastructure, but the models themselves. You want to learn more about the CTO Advisor and the CTO Advisor Road Trip? Follow us on the web, thectoadvisor.com. Since the last conversation, I now own ctoadvisor.com. Finally, after 10 years. Talk to you next. CTO Advisor Road Trip Lightboard conversation.
Perfect. Thank you, Keith.
That was fun.
Well, nice.